a tier list for pals in the current state of the game. It will cover everything from mounts to base workers to combat pals. And what I mean by the current state of the game is that you might have a pal that is very strong, but you don't really have anything to fight with it, so it's not worth breeding. Some pals are very good when you catch them before you get the breeding farm, so they will be ranked a lot higher because they're useful maybe at level 10, 15, 20, 30. So it's not an overall tier list of what is strongest and weakest, but how available the pal is when it is available, and if it does the exact same thing as another pal, just worse, will factor into this tier list. So I think I've sorted them in order. We'll see what comes first. Nice. We start with Lamball, E tier. It does nothing really in combat, bad exclusive skill, and as a ranch pal it makes wool, but it just makes less than Cremis or Melpaka, so it is our first E tier pal. Moving on to Cattiva. A little bit better than Lamball. Once you catch it, you can use it to mine and handiwork, so it's a decent starting pal, one of those first pals you can catch, so it's rated a little higher than Lamball simply because of that. And it actually has a pretty good exclusive skill, while it has a terrible partner skill. Chikipi, C tier, because it makes cakes and it can also be used as a breeding buddy. It's good for down breeding when you want to pass legend all the way down to those lower tier pals like Lifmunks and Jolthogs and stuff like that. So Chikipi does have a use into the late game, but it is a terrible combat pal. Lifmunk, E tier, because it does the exact same thing that a Tanzee does as a base pal, but worse, and it's just not a good combat pal. Foxparks, same thing there. It does the same thing as Rooby does, but it doesn't evolve into a partner skill and the flamethrower partner, or doesn't evolve into a booster pal. And it does nothing in a ranch, so it's rated E tier. Let's see what we got. Fuack. So this is one of the first decent combat pals you can get. It has a good partner skill. It's useful up until around level 15, 20-ish. So it's rated as C tier because it's a good early game combat pal. Sparkit, booster pal, straight into C tier. It's not rated higher because currently electric is not a great element overall. There's nothing really to fight. There's, I think, the Alpha German Tide. So while it is a booster pal, it is not useful yet. Tanzee, D tier. It is an upgrade to Lifmunk because it has transporting over medicine. So it is just ranked a little bit higher as one of those early game base work pals. Rooby, same thing as Sparkit. It's a booster pal, but fire is slightly more relevant as an element. It's good against hard mode Lily and Lylene and phase 2 Bellanor Libro. So it's more a question of how useful it is in the current state of the game when you compare it to Sparkit. Pengullet, yeah, watering pal that transports, but then you might as well use something like a Celaray. The partner skill is just for memes, so it is E tier. Penking, available pretty late, around level 20, and at that point you have other pals that do the same thing. So this is one of those examples where it could have been rated higher if it was just available a little bit earlier, but currently it does the same thing as other pals that you can get earlier. So Jolthog, it does the same thing as other electric pals, but just slightly worse. It is available early and can be used to fight the early Penking and Asherope, so maybe I should actually move this one up one tier. Can I not move it? There is no selection to move. Let's see what tool I can use for that. Okay. So we move you up a rank. I'm not sure if it's going to block another pal now. So this tier list is not set in stone. I might change things around a little bit depending on comments and stuff that I haven't thought about yet, since there is 163 pals to go through, and I have definitely not tested them all in all kinds of aspects of the game and such. So I think Jolthog deserves a little bump, just for Penking and rope fighting. Okay, Jolthog Cryst. Yeah, there's not much to do with ice. There's no early game dragon. I think that you're gonna be fighting with by the time you get this pal. It's also very rare, so you're not gonna be condensing it. So I don't think it's gonna get bumped up to D tier to join Jolthog. Maybe somebody will convince me otherwise. Gumoss, not much to say about this pal. It doesn't do much in the base. It has only planting. It makes you cut trees faster, so there's not a whole lot going on for that pal. That's Vixy. I couldn't make a lower tier. There is a case where Vixy is good when you're playing on a dedicated server, because you can just go offline and you'll come back to some spheres and arrows, but if you're playing solo, I've done the math for it, it produces less raw materials than using any other pal for just mining and logging. And once you do max condense it with max work speed and maxed everything, you get one red sphere like every 2 or 4 hours, I believe it was. So there's way better pals to spend your time breeding and maxing, and even as a level 1 pal. I guess if it's your first time playing the game ever, and you're just exploring and you're not back at your base for hours, you come back with some arrows and spheres, it could be nice, but at the same time just putting any other pal on the stone or logging pit will produce more raw materials per hour than a Vixy will. So it's just a multiplayer pal, or if you're leaving the game AFK all night kind of pal. Okay, Hoocrates boost some of the best pals in the game in Shadowbeak and Bellanor Libero, so it is up in the B tier along with Rooby. It's one of those meta boosters. Teafant. It's used just because there's a glitch. You can take it in and out of the pal box to restore or reset the cooldown rather. So early game it's the best way to heal. If they fix this glitch, it's gonna get bumped down to E tier. But currently it's a great way to full heal yourself in the early stages of the game, or any part of the game really until Lylene. Depresso, yeah, not much to say. It's just a mascot pal. It does the same thing that other early game pals does, but worse, and is harder to catch. Cremis is just a better Lamball, and it boosts neutral. So maybe it should be in C tier instead, because it does... Well, it can compete with Sparkit, I guess. Let's see if it doesn't block anything up here. Currently, boosting Holy Burst and Airblade is actually very viable on Celine, but then you use Hoocrates instead, since you will be maxing this one anyway. So this one, probably belongs here, because you can also put it as a ranch pal for some wool. But I don't really know when you would use wool. Maybe you're sort of here-ish. In between. And I did the same thing. Let's see what comes back. Daedream. It's a good transporter when you catch it. Works night. So it's again one of those early game pals that is good for just catching a couple and having them transport during nights. It's not really good for combat. Not much to say about Rushoar. I guess you can use it instead of a pickaxe, but personally I don't mine manually anyway. I have my pals do that for me. Nox is an interesting early game pal. Decent for early game combat, but it's very rare, so you're not going to find any to condense to past rank 1, I guess. But it's better than the E tier pals, definitely. Fuddler is kind of useless, especially with the ore mining sites. And if you're the kind of person that's watching this video, you've probably looked at a map of where to find ore as well. So the partner skill is not very good. You could have used a little buff to its mining. Level 2 mining would have been better for it. Right now it's not really useful. Killamari, good transporter pal, but it's rare, only available in caves. But it also doubles as a glider. So it is decent compared to the other early game pals. Mao, it makes gold in the ranch, but if you compare it to other ranch pals, it actually makes less gold per hour than any other ranch pal. So just selling whatever you get from other ranch pals or crafting stuff is better than having a Mao. So currently it is the worst ranch pal for its intended purpose. And then there's another one. Okay, Celaray, great early game transporter. Just go and catch a few of those if you need transporters early game. It will water your crops, it will do a little bit on the crusher, and once you get a level 2 watering pal, you can just turn off the watering, and it will just be the fastest level 1 transporter until you go catch yourself a Vanworm. Direhowl, good early game mount. Has a little less stamina than the other mounts, but it's all you need to really get going, so it does have a place. It scales with condensing and it's pretty common, so you can catch a couple, condense them, choose the one with Swift and use that until you start getting those Pyrins or Dasimu, or even into the Beacon and Ragnarok part of the game. Yep, not much to say about Tocotoco. Not good base worker, not good combat pal. Has a fun partner skill, but there are other partner skills that does the same thing better. Floppy. Not much to say about it. It can be useful when you're doing dungeon runs and stuff, but in general there's not a huge use for it. It was better before when we still had to do manual mining with Astegon. So it has a useful, unique partner skill that you can find a use for, which bumps it up from E tier, but it's not really used for anything right now. Mossarina, it makes the milk. It's slightly lower than Chikipi because it's not the same breeding, it doesn't have the same breeding usability to breed down pals, and you can buy milk, but it is still something you can use if you get tired of pressing max and buy on the merchant over and over again. Bristlob boosts grass, but grass isn't very useful right now, so it's like a worse version of Sparkit. Gobfin, the first S tier pal, probably the best pal overall in the game. It boosts your attack power, each condensing level boosts attack power even more. It's easily available for mass catching and has its own zone pretty much with no other pals, which makes it one of, if not the best pals in the game. Gobfin Ignis ranked slightly below because it's not as easily catchable, but it does do the same thing. So this is one of those, you could have ranked this, so you could have ranked Gobfin Ignis, or I could have ranked Gobfin Ignis all the way down here, because it does the same thing as Gobfin, but just harder to catch. But if you're breeding pals, anyway, it's the same thing, so it's lower ranked than Gobfin, but it's probably the second best pal in the game in that case, depending on how you view it. Hangyu, it's a good transporter for when you get it, but it's still available later than Vanworm, which has a better transporting skill, but it is a gliding pal, and gliders are good. They can get you to the oil rig. I'm not sure if I should move this down or not. Should I move you down? Maybe. It really depends on what kind of gliding pal you want, but it's not really B tier, but it's still not really C tier, I guess. Can't really remember what made me put it in B tier right now. So we'll move it down here in the meantime. That's great. Yellow on yellow. We love it. Definitely going down. Mossanda. So you can use the partner skill to permanently stun some pals. You can use 5 of them to cheese alphas, that's why it's in C tier. But it has the wrong element to be truly relevant. It's just something you can max for fun. Same thing with its element variant. Woolly Pop. It makes cotton candy in the ranch, which is useful for elixirs and medicines. But by the time you've caught enough to max condense it, you probably have enough cotton candy for all your purposes anyway. Caprity, terrible ranching passive, or partner skill I mean, but it is available as an early planting pal. Level 2 planting I think is one of the first level 2 planting pals you can get, which bumps it up to D tier. Melpaca, it's a slightly worse Cremis. It drops the same amount of wool but doesn't double as a booster pal. So maybe this one actually belongs down here. It's like a little better version of Lamball, so let's put it there right now. Eikthyr there. It's up there because it is a early game logging 2 pal, so or lumbering 2. Can also double as a mount. If you catch a couple for logging, you get one with Swift. It's decent if you don't want to go the Direhowl direction, but it's mostly here because it's available very early as a logging 2 pal. Eikthyr Terra. People forget it exists. I don't think I've ever seen it used on anybody's team. It's a sanctuary pal that just blocks spawns from other sanctuary pals that you want. So yeah, E tier. Nightwing, the first flying mount, that's why it's D tier. But you could also just level for a little bit further and go for Vanworm. But it is useful as the first flying mount to go hunt for some eggs. Ribbony, just a worse version of Cremis. The partner skill that it makes weapons faster at the weapon bench is not really useful because it still only has the leveled 1 work skill, so it just isn't very good at what it does. Incineram is B tier because of its partner skill and element. You can catch it at level 10, and then you go kill those first early game alphas, get your first Asian tech points, get your first incubator running. So this is purely here because of how early it is available and the elemental advantages it has over Gumoss, Sui, Shillet, and some of those other early game alpha pals that you can kill with it. And then we have its elemental variant, which is useless. There could be an argument made that you would use this to breed Poison Fog, which does not suffer from diminishing returns. So you could argue that this should be 1 tier higher up, but I'm going to keep it down here for now. If you find this in a cage, Orsox, it's an early game kindling level 2 pal, I believe. But you could also, I think it's as early as level 12 or 14, go catch yourself a Vixen with level 3 kindling at the lava strip. So there's no real reason to use it, and I think the partner skill is that it negates fire temperature maybe, if I remember correctly. So, or does it, it's either, okay, it probably makes more sense if it was that it negated cold, which is just a worse version of what Kitsun does. So I'm not really sure which place this pal has in the game. Right now it's D tier because you can get it early from a cage. Doomed, boosts ground. Ground also has Nocklum, so it boosts Nocklum, and you can use it to make high quality pal oil. So it's A tier, the first A tier pal. It's also useful when you get it early. You catch the alpha pal and it has mining level 2. Which I think is the earliest you can get it unless you go hunting tombats at night, which can be pretty rare. This one is a guaranteed find at the alpha spot. 1 per day though. But it's mostly in A tier due to its partner skill, boosting ground and putting it in the ranch when you're not using it in combat. Yeah, Cognito. It's a fun pal, but it is weak. It just doesn't do much. It competes with other dark type pals. There's a lot of, or dark element rather. There's a lot of dark pals. It's a tough class to be competitive in, so it's not very highly rated. Yeah, Lifmunk's partner skill is kind of useless, and it doesn't do a whole lot for you as a base pal either, and it has weak stats. I guess it's good if you don't know where dungeons are, but if you're watching this video, as I said before, I assume you're checking out some maps for dungeons as well. And its variant does the same. Loopmon does the same thing as Cognito with a little bit better stats, but it suffers from the same thing. It's a dark type pal, dark element pal. Galeclaw, S tier. It's a fast glider that you can shoot from. It allows you to dodge a lot of the tower boss's attacks. It gets you to the oil rig without being shot by lasers. It's useful in the base as a party pal just to move around. It's just a very nice utility pal. It's one of those ones you use it, you kind of get limited to 4 party pals because it's just that good. Wait, which pal was that? Okay, Robin Quill. I mean, the partner skill is decent. It makes you do more damage when you do headshots. But at the same time, headshots are a little bit they're a little bit hard to get when you're using the quad launcher or the rocket launcher. And when you're leveling, you're usually riding a mounted pal, I guess, or something. I just haven't found a great use for it. It does have some pretty decent base work skills, but by the time you get there, you probably have other pals that do the same things, but a little bit better. So it's D tier, kinda. Arguments could be made for E and C. So I guess D is pretty fitting for it. And its friend maybe should be moved down, just because it's available so late in comparison. But for now, I'm just gonna keep this here because their partner skill, I think, is unique to them, maybe. That you do increase damage to weak spots, but so far, I'm not so sure about them. This is just a worse Noclum right now. When you withdraw it into the sphere, the partner skill stops. So the fact that it doesn't boost its own defense means that the partner skill just won't be active in the tower boss's fights when you need to be withdrawing the pal to save it. And yeah, the Terra version is just available at like level 50 or something, and it's ground, so it competes with Noclum, which is just superior in every way. Bigarde. It's the only pal that makes honey, so you need it to make cakes. So it's A tier as a ranch pal. And then you have Elizabeth, which gets boosted by Bigarde, which means that you don't have a flying mount if you want to max boost it. Maybe if this was a little bit better as a mount, it would be bumped up, but it's also grass, so grass is kind of useless right now. Grintail, I think you could argue that with Holy Burst and Airblade getting double damage with the partner skill when it's maxed, it should be higher. But it's pretty slow and fat, so it kind of just dies if you mount it. It's just a worse version of Celine, which bumps it down. And yeah, this suffers from the same thing as Elizabeth. Not really worth, because to max this you kind of need to max 5 pals with the Sui and the Sweepa combo, so it's D tier. Yeah, here they are. Chillet, everybody's favorite, S tier. Useful against Saya, Victor and Bellinor Libero when you're pairing it with Gobfin. So that's straight up S tier. It has terrible combat stats and not a great base worker, but it doesn't matter when you can turn weapons into dragon. And then you have its variant. Now, if Jolthog Ignis had kept the dragon conversion, it would have been good. It would have been a similar situation to Jolthog, but just better, with not switching it to fire. But switching it to fire means that it's now competing with Ragnarok and Pyron. So it's also available very late on Sakurajima. So that's one of those cases where it's just a worse version of other pals that do the same thing but better in every way. Univolt, it's good, but it competes with Beacon that flies, and electricity isn't useful right now. Foxicle boosts ice, so it's a relevant booster. Ice is super effective against Dragon, which means hard mode Axel and Orsurk, and killing or catching your first Jet Dragon. So it is slightly more useful than other booster pals. Pyron is good. It's a very fast mount, even uncondensed. So while leveling, it is very relevant. It's also relevant if you want to switch to fire and you're not comfortable fighting with a flying Ragnarok. But overall, Pyron is just a great leveling pal. You get it pretty early, you give it something like Lightning Streak, Rock Burst, and you go to town with Ring of Mercy, just mass catching. It's probably something I will showcase in a future video as a leveling guide. So keep that in mind when leveling. It's either this or mass catching 117 Dasimu. So you can just use one of these to great effect. Same arguments for this. Raindrix, yeah, it doesn't do a whole lot. It's available sometime in the mid game. Not great work stats. Keeps you cool in hot areas, which is, you can like craft the sheep armor and buy an undershirt or buy something with dog coins to do that. Pyron, or Rayhound rather, maybe should be a little bit higher. It's a very fast mount when maxed, but at the same time electricity doesn't really have a space right now. Kitsun, same thing as the Raindrix, but just a little bit better. It protects you from both hot and cold, but it's rare. It's a rare pal. So it's not that great to get Daedream on that early, and it's replaced by a shirt. Dassy, yeah. I think when you're comparing using these to using something like a Gale Claw or a booster pal in the same slot, you're better off using the other options. Lunaris suffers from just being rare and available late. It does have a good handiwork skill, but you can get that handiwork skill very early on from a Vixen, I believe. Yeah, it's Vixen. So I think I said Vixen had Kindling level 3 earlier, but that was a mistake. It's Kindling 2 and has handiwork 3. And that was why it was better than the Arsox, rather. So that's why this was moved down. And also why Lunaris is moved down, because you can just get Vixen a lot earlier at the lava strip, the common Mimog hunting ground, just south of the desert. Dinosum, yeah, it's available early. It's like a better Eikthyr there at the point where you can get it. It has that logging stat and planting stat, so it will do planting and then go do some logging, while this one will just do logging. That's why it's up here and this one is here, simply for leveling purposes when you're like level 15. And this one is available much later, so it's in D tier. Their partner skills are not very useful either because they're not relevant in the current state of the game. Serpent is here because it is the first level 2 watering pal, I believe, but it doesn't do much else. You could use this until you get Asherobe. This one is very quickly replaced by Asherobe as well. So it has a place if you want to rush out and get watering level 2, otherwise it would have been down here. Probably one of the worst pals in the game. it decreases the weight of ore, which is just worthless now with homebound thunderclouds and weight elixirs and stuff like that. We got the ore mining sites. Nobody's out there mining ore with this. I'm not even sure what this would be useful for. I'm not sure why I bumped it up a step. I believe I had it down here. And then I bumped it up for some reason. I think it's just because it can be used as a dark conversion mount. So it fits the Gobfin build. So it's hard to justify putting it down here with these, but it's also a pretty useless pal. Dig Toys, very good for when you can get it. Level 3 mining at around level 20. So it's just covers that whole level 20 to level 45-ish era. And in the current state of the game, a lot of mining pals are actually missing the nodes. They're not hitting them. So Dig Toys is one of those that you know, if you leave it in your pure quartz mining base or your sulfur base, it will mine those nodes. You don't need to stand around and look at it. So it's up here not for a late game, but as a mid game pal that is worth getting a couple. It's always worth it at level 20 to 30 to just go to the desert and catch a bunch of these. Take those that have the work speed passives. I wouldn't suggest maybe breeding them up to rank 4, but just catching enough that you have maybe 6 of them with some work speed passives. If you do, or if you're playing very low XP, could be worth breeding. But it is A tier because it covers such a huge part of the game, and mining is just such an important part of the game as well. Exact same reasoning here. You get Tombat, it has transporting skill, it has mining skill, it has, is it gathering or planting? Let's double check actually. It is gathering, which is very important to get early on. So you can catch this already around level 7, I think, and get yourself a pal that mines or transports it, and when it's time for it, it will gather and give you more than a level 1 gathering pal, because it scales with leveling, or with gathering level rather. This one could have been up here. Lavender, the partner skill is extremely good late game. It's just that it's weak to Victor and Saya's attacks. But when you are that late game, it's not going to get attacked anyway. But at the same time, it does the same thing a Felbat does, but worse. But the partner skill, you could argue with the Gobfins that it should be up here as well. It's very easy to max catch rather. It's an easy pal to get going early, get yourself that partner skill, but at the same time, in that mid game, you're not doing enough damage that the heal is great. So it's one of those late game pals that is outscaled by Felbat. Lamball, it doesn't do much. You get flame organs in the ranch, but I think you also get that from one of the fire boosting pals, Hangyu Ignis, I think. So maybe it should even be moved down a tier, because why would you use this compared to Hangyu Ignis? Vanworm, you can start catching them as early as level 12, transporting level 3, good flying mount at level 21 I believe. So this pal is useful all the way into the late game. It's the best pal to transport from ranches and pure quartz. So it stays relevant all the way from level 12 into the end game. And this one is a toss-up because it is a naturally nocturnal cooling pal. So you could just go and catch one or get an egg and put that on your refrigerator. So that's why it's sort of high up, but at the same time now with nocturnal you could use any cooling pal for that, and it's available pretty late in the game. It does have great attack stat though, So it is useful as an ice/dark pal for like Libero, but there are much better options. Bushi. It's a good fighting pal when you can catch it, but there are also better options around. Not much to say about it. It has good logging skill, but its elemental variant Bushi Noct has better lumbering skill. So you could argue that as a combat pal, it should be up here. But its partner skill, which is the exclusive skill as well, scales with condensing level. So while you're leveling, you're probably not going to be catching 117 of them. So it stays in the C tier. It's not bad, it's just average. Beacon. Electricity is sadly not useful right now, unless you really want to kill the German-tide Alpha. It's a decent flying mount, but Ragnarok is faster. Ragnarok is fast, you can use Seed Mine to double your damage, and it is very relevant against Libero. Not much else to say about it. It's the fastest flying mount until Shadowbeak, I believe. So it's very useful. Sadly, they made it bigger, so it doesn't fit in dungeons anymore. But it is still a S tier pal. Catras, it needs a work level buff to compare with Vixen. Right now it's just useful for hunting the dog coins from Mimog. So if we're gonna have a Catras and Vixen competition or rivalry, Catras could use a little buff into like Transporting 3 to compete with Vixen's Handiwork 3. Catras Ignis, what is your job? Well, you pass Flame Funnel. So not great. Vixen, as stated earlier, it has Kindling level 2, Handiwork 2, Transport or Handiwork 3, Transporting 2, and you can start catching it at the lava strip very early on. So it is a great pal to catch a couple of early on and keep around until you get Anubis, I think is the next step. And not much to say about Vixen Noct. Unlike Catras, it has the exact same work skills as its elemental variant, but it's available pretty late unless you do some very specific gender breeding between these rivals. So not super useful, but not terrible. Verdash, it's the only really relevant grass pal. It gives you move speed, which is nice. Can be used on the oil rig, but you would probably use Gale Claw instead. But it does give you the move speed and grass element, which is decent. Could argue that it should be B tier, but it is the highest attack stat of its element as well, so I guess we'll keep it A for now. Maybe should have moved somewhere around here. Who remembers this pal? It's not useful really. Has medicine level 3, but there are other pals that do everything it does better. The partner skill is not very useful. Boost the drops from ground. Not much else to say about it. Sibylix is an interesting pal because it gives you 2 extremely strong frost spikes. Or blizzard spikes, or whatever the skill is called. But it still doesn't have great stats. There are better options for ice pals, like Frostallion. But it still makes a decent combat pal, and it gives you some gold in the ranch. It used to be the best ranching pal for gold, but now Doomit is better. But you also don't want to be ranching for gold because you want to use other methods for making money. So it's C tier because of its broken partner skill. 2 frost spikes with 2.5 bonus damage is pretty good. Yeah, not much to say about Elfidran. Doesn't have good work stats, it doesn't have good combat stats, and it just boosts drops from dark pals. And in general, these boost dropping or drop boosting pals are pretty bad because you still get more loot by just flying around on a Jetragon and killing faster than the bonus drops gives you. So same reason here for this one. There's not much else to say about that one, I think. Kelpsy boosts water, which is kinda, I think it's only German Tide that's relevant, but it does give pal fluids in the ranch. So it's both a booster and a ranch pal. Not great as a booster pal, but as a ranch pal, it is very nice. Kelpsy Ignis, just a better version of Rooby, because you get flame organs as well. Asherobe, Gobfin meta, good watering pal early, good against Blast, Emote, Rio, and hard mode Marcus and Flaris. So it's just a great pal in the current state of the game. And as early as level 17-ish, even earlier if you're skilled enough you can catch it and get yourself that watering level 3. It does only watering, but it will just be at the crusher or the plantations anyway. Yeah, this one isn't great. Creo Lynx. It's got cooling level 3. It makes Dragon Pals drop more loot, but it's not like... If it made them drop loot more often, like increase the schematic drop rate when you're farming Jetragon, maybe. But right now, not good combat stats. Available late. Just not great. This one is decent if you get the egg early for kindling, but you could also get the German Tide Ignis egg early for kindling. Not a whole lot going on for it really. You got level 3 kindling, and it's the same thing in grass types. Grass element pals drop more. So it's not bad, not good. There are better fire pals around. Same thing with Mimog again. It's a dog coin farmer. Doesn't have a lot of else benefits going for it. But dog coins is always nice. Spawns with a glutton passive. Not great. If you manage to breed that one with decent skills, it breeds into a lot of stuff. You can use the partner skill to perma-stun stuff. So it's kind of in the same ranking here as Mossanda, but the passive skill brings it down, and it doesn't have a great work stat either. Just watering level 2 and level 1 transporting. This one is just a little bit better because it's an early electricity 3 pal. You could use Gristbolt as well, but I'm not sure why I put it in there. I think it's because it's useful-ish against Rio, but it's just a budget or Circ. So it's decent elements and decent partner skill. So C tier is just the decent. Arguments could be made that it is a good early game pal for when you get it around level 18 or 20. The Bronze Cherry, planting level 3, but it only does planting, so it's not great, and the partner skill is also just a worse version of Wumpo, and it's grass. And this one is just the same, but more rare, so it gets bumped down. You would just be using Asherobe instead. Decent when you get it, but it gets outclassed by Lylene. I'm talking about Petalia now. It has a lot of different work levels or work skills. You can use it for the same thing you would use the Teafant for, which is the heal, put it in the pal box and take it out. So it replaces Teafant if you're doing that trick. So that's just why it's here, because you can abuse that glitch. Reptiro. The exclusive skill wasn't great, the partner skill isn't great. It has good elements against Rio, but there are other pals that do the same thing against Rio with 2 resistances with higher attack. Right now, being a defensive pal is just not a great spot to be in. And the same thing can be said for its variant. And what did I add here? Okay, King Paka. Yeah, available only as an alpha, so it's hard to condense. Not a good partner skill, not a good exclusive skill, not a good pal. and even worse with a higher level version. Malmorist is too big. It's just too big. It dies to most things. It has a high HP pool but low defense, low attack. Not a good partner skill. Exclusive skill just doesn't seem to hit anything. Maybe if they give it a buff to its exclusive it might be viable, but at the same time the exclusive skill is ground and the pal is grass. It's just not a good spot. Same thing here, just not good. Wumpo, the best pal pre-Sakurajima for logging, transport. It used to be good, but it has now been replaced by other pals and weight elixirs. So its glory days are sadly over. And the elemental variant suffers from the same thing. Warsect. I like Warsect. I think it has a nice shotgun build with the Giga Horn and Seed Mine or Air Blade / Rock Burst. Just sadly, defense isn't a high priority right now, but it has an interesting partner skill. It would be better if the partner skill gave itself a little bit of fire resistance, but right now it's just for the player. So Warsect, it's a fun pal. I can recommend using it, but it does line up perfectly here in the decent, C as in decent. Fenglope's glory days are also over. It used to be a very viable dungeon mount. I guess it kinda still is. It has decent attack for being a neutral pal, but right now it doesn't really fill any special criteria to make it stand out. It's just an average pal now. Felbat is extremely good late game. Probably one of the best pals to use against hard mode towers. The heal together with high attack stats is amazing. It's probably the easiest pal to use to tackle the hard mode tower bosses. You can breed Holy Burst onto it. It resists Victor and Saya's element. It's good against Libro, but it's just a good pal. The partner skill carries it a long way once you get into the late game with legendary weapons and maxed attack. Wyvern, not really much to say about it. Sanctuary 1 pal with mining 2 and transporting 3, but it transports worse than a Vanworm would. It's kinda slow. It doesn't really have a whole lot going for it. It does enhance dragon attacks, but there are other dragons that do the same thing better without you having to mount it and being in a vulnerable position. Wyvern Botan should probably drop down. It's available very late into the game. It's grass. It doesn't keep the dragon boost, but it boosts grass instead. So it should probably... It's hard to justify being down here though, because it is still dragon. I think it stays in D for now. Arguments could be made to bring it down a bit. Yeah, this whole mount to increase fire damage. All these pals that you need to mount to do this that don't really run around. You want to build max attack on them, that leaves them vulnerable to being counterattacked. You mount it, you try to pop an attack, it gets stunned, it just dies. As a mining pal, Astegon is better. So it's decent, but not great. Rio can't get Legend, and it can't get Holy Burst, and it can't get a lot of the stuff from breeding. And it is probably one of the last pals you get in the game. So by the time you get it, you're done. Like, why are you still here? But it is very fun. It's a fun pal, so it's get a little bump. Helsefyr used to be the king of transport. Then we got the pal monitor stand update, so you could turn off kindling for Vanworm. It makes your... what is it? It makes you dark element when flying. Or when mounted. And why would you be using dark? What are you fighting with dark? It just makes you not very effective against the late game pals. Same arguments here. Electric isn't great. It's available very late. The saddle in particular is extremely late, so it's not very good. Astegon is S tier as the best mining pal, and mining is probably one of, if not the most important work suitabilities in the game to start maxing early. This should probably priority number 1 for you to max when you're playing. Start breeding an Astegon with full work speed as soon as you unlock the breeding ranch or breeding farm. Probably, because why would you be maxing like a German-Tide Ignis that will consume your ores faster than you make them? If you max this first, you can get a nice stock of ores up and running by the time you have a maxed out Ignis. How was that Menace thing? Suffers from the same thing here as Warsec does. Defensive pals are just not super viable. Poison is not super viable. It doesn't work against raid bosses. It's terrible against tower bosses. So it's one of those fun to use but not great. Same thing here. Ground is a little bit more viable because it's against Rio. But also, well, yeah, it's good against So and Grisbolt. But there are other ground pals that does the same thing but better. Also against Axel and Orsurk, I guess. Moving on. Anubis. Great combat pal and a great base worker. The best handy worker. Converts your element to ground, so you can use it against Phase 2 Rio, you can use it against Axel and Orsurk. You don't have to mount, so it can attack at the same time with max attack build instead of movement speed builds like this one. It's just overall excellent for both combat and the current bosses that we have, and as a base worker. So it's SS tier. German-Tide, best watering pal. So S tier will have some of these best base workers in it. It's the best watering pal, no options there really. German-Tide Ignis is both an excellent water or kindling pal rather, and an excellent fighter. It's good against both Libro and Rio and Victor and Shadowbeak and Lily and Eileen. It can get Legend, it can get Holy Burst. This one does get replaced by Frostallion for the Crusher, so German-Tide Ignis, probably one of the best overall pals in the game. And what was that? Yeah, Susaku. Yes, it's nice if you want to fly up and stay in the air for a long time. Otherwise it's not great. Same thing here. These are those you need to mount to boost their own attacks, which brings that whole do I want swift or attack passives on it, so they're not great. Grisbolt is great. It's fun to use, it has a really good electric exclusive skill. You can get it as early as level 20 for that transporting 3, electricity 3, so you can generate and then do some transporting. It could do handiwork and logging, but it's probably better to turn those off. But it is an overall strong pal, can carry you through the game, has good partner skill, high DPS partner skill, and good work passives for when you get it. It's not great at scaling into the late game, which brings it down to B tier, and it is like a worse Orsurk, which brings it could have been here, but Orsurk existing means that it's here in B. Lylene, the best planting pal, that's why she's up here. You could argue that planting pals overall should be here because you can buy all the stuff, but at the same time you can abuse the healing. I have one favorited on the first page of the pal box. Whenever I'm low, I bring it out and heal to full, place it back, bring it out. Same thing here as Teafant. And where did the other flower girl go? The other flower girl, Petulia. Lylene knocked, yeah. It's just a worse version of this. That's why it's down here. It's dark. Dark is very competitive. It has no real spot in the current state of the game. Phalaris has great exclusive skills, a bad partner skill, but it is up here just because of how good its exclusive skills are. Super effective against 2 elements. Hard to justify placing it up with the rest of these pals, but it is definitely not like among these pals. So it's just a good fighting pal. It's surprisingly good to go like Eternal Flame, one of those few pals that utilizes the 30% boost with 3 strong skills of the same element. Orzhov, very good against Rio, that's why it's up here. Also the best pal to get for your oil production, so it does have its space in the S tier. It resists 2 of Rio's elements, so it is right now the best, or one of the top 3 at least, pals to use for Rio Ultra, and it's a great base work pal. Shadowbeak is potentially one of the best pals in the game, but it's dark, so there's not a lot to use it for. Overall, very strong pal, but right now in the current state of the game, it's not really super effective against any strong boss. Palladius, you're down here because you are a legendary pal with really nothing going on for you. It's a hard fight to do, hard catch, but it is slower than Necromus. It does not have good base work stats. It does not have good attacks. It doesn't learn Holy Burst. So it's just overall not useful. It's better than a lot of these pals for fighting, but since this was a tier list about like viability and usability as you're leveling and as you're going, by the time you're getting here, you have all these better options already. So it doesn't really have a spot in the current state of the game at all. Maybe one of the more controversial E tier pals, except for maybe Chikipi Ignis. But currently, if you have an argument for why this should be bumped up, please post it, because I am not sure when I would ever use Palladius over anything else. And here's Necromus. Why is this one S tier? It's just the best mount to use for dungeon running. It's the best ground mount, the fastest one. You can also use it to fight Bellinor Libero early. Catch 15 of these, put them in your base, teach them Seed Mine and Flare Storm, and they're just a good buffer as a raid pal. Frostallion, the best base worker for the Refrigerated Crusher to make Paldium fragments. So, as a fighting pal, not great. I'm not sure what you would use it for. It has one of the best partner skills though. It gives you 40% attack buff compared to the 20% attack buff of these pals. So, it has the potential to give you the highest attack stat in the game, together with Frostallion Noct. But right now, it's not a whole lot to use it for. I guess you would use it for fighting Jetragon and hard mode Axel and Orzhov, but there are better options to use for that as well. So right now it's up here as the best base pal, pretty much. Same thing could be said here. The dark conversion, similar to Hellzephyr. When are you going to convert your attack to dark, really? But it is the best gathering pal. So it is up here as a base worker. One thing to note also about this before I move on to Jetragon is that it can get Holy Burst. You can breed skills onto it compared to other legends, and it has the highest base stat in the game. It's just that you're not really going to be using the partner skill to its full extent right now. Jetragon S tier is the fastest mount in the game. It also has very high attack stat, even if it can't be boosted. Like if you're using a dragon for fighting stuff, you're probably going to be using Ignis anyway. But Jetragon, it's like Galeclaw. These are the pals that make you have only 3 party slots left on your everyday travels because they're just that good at what they do. This one is down here. It requires prep to do the raid, and it's just a worse version of Libero in every way. Which brings us to Libero. Currently the highest attack stat pal in the game, but it is again dark. Doesn't really have a spot as a top tier pal in the current state of the game with these tower bosses. The last 2 tower bosses, or Victor rather, will resist it. It will do neutral damage to Saya, but it leaves itself pretty vulnerable when it's using its skill, and it's a sort of a glass cannon. So it's kind of similar to Shadowbeak, just an extremely strong dark type, or dark element pal, but currently not so useful. Selene, highest potential damage with the double ear blade and holy burst, but you mount it and you can't use weapons. It's extremely slow. So right now it's good up until the point where it gets one-shotted, which is against like the hard mode tower bosses. You can use it to fight Rio and stuff, but it would be a lot better if you could use weapons on it, to use the grapple save technique or something like that, which brings it down all the way into B, when it should probably be somewhere up here if you could use weapons. Crudira C tier because the partner skill is good. Not for anything else, it's just a usable utility pal to launch up and use your gliding pal. I might be biased for it because I just think it's fun. It's a neat pal to use and have around. Lulu, it's good as a base pal. It's not as necessary as these, but it doesn't hurt to just put some combat Lulus or work speed Lulus in the base and have them around to just help with some handiwork while having the growth speed time of the plantations. Probably 1 or 2 is enough. Shroomer, these will probably be a lot more, let's just bring in the second one as well. These would probably be a lot better if the monitor stand settings worked. Right now, if you turn the game off, it resets to normal work mode. So when we start exploring the brutal work mode, the hard work modes, Shroomers will jump up in viability. Right now, I don't really use them. You could argue late game that you should max one and use it as a logging pal over other logging pals when you're only using wood for charcoal for ammunition. And in that case, you want the one that works during the night. Yeah, not much to say about Kick It. I think it lowers the weight of oil and has terrible combat stats, so it's just, you would probably never use it. Then we have Suits here. It ranches for bones. You could buy bones. It also has great elements against Libero, but there are other options against Libero. So it fits in here with the slightly useful ranching pals. You can breed to pass Flame Funnel as well. Trickster, currently the best logging pal. If you compare it to Bushi, they have the exact same stats in everything, but Trickster is a little faster, so it's just up here to be the best logging pal. But logging isn't super useful, so it's not as useful as these other base workers. Noclum, the strongest pal in the game currently. There is no pal that really comes close to it in terms of just throw it out, use the partner skill, and it will survive almost anything. One of the few that you can use for hard mode towers without having to withdraw dodge everything. You will still need to withdraw dodge like Saya and Celine's Airblade, but overall it is currently up there with Felbat as like the easiest to use pals for hard mode, since you can still dodge and shoot while they're fighting. Well, it's a bit slightly harder to use Shillet. Like Shillet probably has a higher peak, like highest DPS peak, but it dies in 1 or 2 skills from Saya and Celine. So Noclum is just easier to execute while staying competitive. You can also use Noclum against the raid bosses, just teach it any skill. It's probably the best all-round pal. All you need is 2 Noclums and 3 Dumuds and you can take on any tower boss and both raid bosses. So currently just the strongest pal in the game and the best transporter in the game. It has faster than Wumpo and has transporting level 4. Yakumo, it's decent if you're hunting passives. So it has a decent partner skill. If you use it, you use it. If you just want to breed, you can just breed. When you have the 4 passives you want, it might just be better to just breed from it. So it's mostly useful for getting the passives you want on Legends or something like the Meteor Pals. So it's not great. It does have some utility, which puts it in C tier. Dogen is not very good. It's replaced by 1 item, the Homebound Thundercloud, and its exclusive skill just doesn't work well. Dasimu, up there with Necromus. It's available very early, but you do need to mass catch it if you compare it to Pyron, but it is an extremely fast mount. And it has stab on Rock Burst. So you could just go catch these at level 20 because it will be viable all the way into late game, teach it Rock Burst, and just go to town with it. Mimog, not very useful. You could just use the lockpicks instead. It fills up a party slot, so I wouldn't really rate it high at all. And then we have Xenovator, which is, like, if you catch it very early it's decent, but it's very hard to condense. You have to wait, unless you change the settings, a couple of hours to catch the next one, and by that time you'll probably have out-leveled its viability anyway. Xenoguard suffers a little bit from that. It's gonna take so many hours to get a male and a female, and you can't breed it for Holy Burst, you can't use boosting pals. If you do manage to get it pretty early, like around level 30, it is one of the best leveling partners if you're not breeding anything. It does get very strong skills naturally, but with skill fruit trees that doesn't really matter. It's good for mining pure quartz. It gives you a bonus to pure quartz drops. But then you also need to breed up 4 of them plus a flying mount probably. So it's not super good, so it's somewhere in between here. And I think that covers it. So this is the complete tier list. I will make some changes before uploading it on the website. I will read some of the comments, your thoughts on these pals. If there was something I missed, or if you really don't agree with some placements, but keep in mind that this is not an overall tier list, or like these pals would be up here. This is how they compare to other pals that does the same job as them. So Palladius is just the worst Necromus and doesn't have the right elements. Bellanor is just the worst Libero and requires almost the same amount of prep at that stage of the game to get it. These compete with Dark type or Dark elements. So yeah, this is just a tier list for how useful they are compared to their equivalents. Thanks for watching and leaving some feedback perhaps.